Jason, thanks so much for joining us on Wall Street Unplugged.
Thanks for having me today. Great to be here.
Well, you've been doing this a long time, right? I mean, you have senior positions at several leading financial institutions. What attracted you to the cannabis space, and when did you realize that, wow, this is a market that it's not just some kind of little thing, that this is going to grow into something this big?
Yeah, I guess two things. Professionally, I've always been interested in emerging markets, emerging industries. Starting as a lawyer, I did a lot of work in the structured finance space, and that took me over to investment banking. And I've always had this interest and curiosity to get into new asset classes and new industries. And it's about in 2014, I moved back from the U.S. back up to Canada, and it was right around then we started seeing a lot of activity on the investment banking side for cannabis cultivators in the medical side, looking to raise capital to expand their operations. And the fact that this wasn't legal at the time in Canada from a recreational perspective, and B, it wasn't legal in most countries around the globe, it was hard to raise capital. So it was an interesting challenge to figure out how to bring some of these companies to market. And then B, just the efficacy behind the product. I mean, listening to company after company, story after story of how medical cannabis was actually helping a number of people, you could really see the total, the huge addressable market and opportunity it would have, and also seeing it in the polls and public opinion where it was moving from, I'll call it this kind of taboo type product to something that was becoming socially normalized, socially acceptable. So it is just combination of I guess right time, right place, and I guess I've been in the cannabis industry for 6 or 7 years now, so it's been a pretty great ride.
So you're a veteran, right, in the industry.
Yeah, relative veteran.
So I'm looking at the election, right? Everyone's focused on the candidates, of course, and we hate to get political, but when you kind of, I don't know if it was under the radar, but you had 5 more states approve it. I think it's 15 in total for recreational use. I'm pretty sure. But you mentioned something just now when you said internationally. I think we can all identify with the states, but what about international? Could you talk about the growth internationally? I mean, is that because everyone's the U.S. is the biggest market, but yeah.
Yeah, U.S. is absolutely the biggest, singular market, and just looking at North America, obviously, already we have full adult use legalization in Canada. Mexico as well, another large country by population, is coming online for full recreational use by the end of this year. And that's been in the works for a while. But going outside of North America, looking to Europe and the rest of the world, there's over 40 countries that have now legalized medical cannabis or are in the process of legalizing. And their total populations represent over 1 billion people. So outside of the U.S., there's this tremendous movement to legalize. We actually have the United Nations that are going to vote to reschedule cannabis at the end of this year based on the WHO recommendations. And, that'll help open up that global market. So, yeah, to your point, 15 states plus the District of Columbia have legalized adult use. There's another 20 states for medical use as well. That's a big story on its own. And we'll see if we have a divided Congress or not. That will determine the timeline of federal legalization to some extent in the U.S. But one way or the other, we're going to see federal legalization in the U.S. And quite likely in the next few years, we're going to have 40, pushing 50 countries globally that have medical cannabis programs. So it's a tremendous global opportunity as well as just here in North America.
No, that's fantastic. So let's get into your fund a little bit, right? The MJ fund. And I'm going to bring this up for everybody to see. So, and they have the expert on it, which is a nice, beautiful picture of you, which I want to put up because you seem like a modest guy. So I just wanted to throw that up there. But it said, the first U.S. and world's largest ETF to target the global cannabis industry. You have 33 holdings. Here's your assets under management, and you have nice states approval. And guys, I have the fact sheet here. You can find out everything you want. This is the largest. I guess out of the 33 issues, a number of holdings, could you venture into the international market? Or are you seeing, I mean, there's probably hundreds that have come out that just smaller companies, and some of them might be promising, but, how does that work in terms of your allocation? Can you go international if you find the right stocks and outside, I guess, North America?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the bulk of the portfolio has international exposure. Yeah, MJ is unique in a number of ways. First off, first publicly traded, exchange-listed fund in the U.S. to focus on the global cannabis market. Launched at the end of 2017, and right now we're approximately around 800 million in assets under management. So it's not only the first; it's by far the largest. And it's also unique in the fact where MJ really focuses on the entire cannabis ecosystem. The majority of our holdings are cannabis cultivation companies. They actually grow and manufacture cannabis-related products. But we also have a number of other verticals in the cannabis system. There includes companies that manufacture equipment, provide services. We have, a pharmaceutical biotech component to it. A consumer product side. So if you look at MJ, it's looking at more than just the companies that grow and cultivate cannabis and have dispensaries that sell, adult use or medical cannabis direct to the public, but they also are involved in many other facets of the industry. And then from it's interesting you mentioned is, do we have international focus? It's in fact fully international. Most of our large holdings have global operations. If you look at companies like Canopy Growth, they're one of the market leaders in Canada, and they have obviously operations in the U.S. initially on the hemp side, but they also have contingent ownership interest in a couple of multi-state operators in the U.S. They have obviously through a distribution partnership, through ownership with Constellation Brands. They're using that to build out their CPG side of things, but they also operate in over a dozen countries globally. So, and we have a number of companies in that bucket. Aphria is another good example, where they own a pharmaceutical distribution company in Germany that gives them significant access to the European medical cannabis market over there. So, I would say at least half of our holdings provide that full global exposure. Another significant portion of them are already operating in the U.S. Scott's Miracle-Gro is a good example, and some people will say it's not really a cannabis company, and that's true at heart. It's not. They don't grow cannabis, but they have significant revenues, and their fastest growing segment that they have is the Hawthorne division, which solely focuses on, the growing equipment and things, all the canopy lighting and what have you that you need to actually go out there. And for individuals that live in states that want to grow their own cannabis, they can do it, but they also have an institutional industrial R&D program as well. So it's a really, MJ is great where it does provide full global exposure. It also does it in a manner that is touching multiple verticals in the cannabis ecosystem. And it's, the reason why we have so much support, so much investor support, even withstanding, correction we've seen in stock prices going through 2018, 2019 in the cannabis space, up significantly from our lows this year. But we've always been gaining momentum and gathering steam with a lot of new assets coming into the fund.
You mentioned Canopy, and I'm pretty sure that you were an advisor to Canopy. I think during the Constellation investment, right? Constellation Brands, I think it was.
Yeah, well, when I first came back to Canada, the investment bank I was working at, we ended up doing some advisory work. It was for Tweed at the moment, which ultimately became Canopy Growth, and then I left before him, and then they ended up falling all the way through to the Constellation's investment.
So, I mean, just understanding Canopy early on where they are now, and you're looking at, say, the big ones that people talk about, whether it's Tilray, Aurora, other ones you hear all the time. I know you know a lot of all the names in the industry, but do you see like a changing in the guard? Do you see new technology, maybe innovation coming out? Where are these guys going to be, you think, that the Microsofts and the Amazons, or they, the BlackBerries or the AOLs? Because, as new technology comes along, new systems, supply chains, everything changes, especially in a high growth new industry like this.
Yeah, I think you're already seeing that happening to some extent. Originally, when there was a rush of capital, when we were looking at full adult use legalization in Canada, just there's a splattering of money everywhere, and it was all invested off of narrative, and it was a grow at all costs kind of mentality. So we had a lot of these companies, a lot of the bigger ones, some of them that you mentioned, that they were just building these green meadows. I mean, they were all about trying to get as much growing capacity as possible, on the hope that there would be this massive build out in Canada, that there'd be legalization in the U.S. and of course legalization globally. But as things happen, legalization in one country takes a fair amount of time. Implementation of legalization takes another fair chunk of time, and we saw that alone Ontario is Canada's biggest province with almost 40% of the country's population. And, within it, not even, in the first year after legalization, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 dispensaries where people could buy, legal cannabis. So it took a long time for the regulation framework and supply chain distribution channels to really build out. And we're seeing a significant uptake in sales now, but that wore heavily on a lot of these companies as they burn through their cash. And, you think of it globally too, as well. We have to see trade treaties, be changed and amended to allow a true global market. And then the U.S. ditto down there. Even though we'll have state legalization and federal legalization, it'll still take a long time for all the regulations and guidelines to come into place. So that's created a lot of havoc and created some haves and have-nots. There's a lot of companies that raised capital when it was cheap, have significant war chests, have great investment partners, and they are becoming kind of cannabis 2.0 companies in the fact where they're really CPG companies that focus on cannabis product. Canopy is a great example of that. Free is a great example of it. Kronos and Tilray, they're going that way as well. But we're also seeing other companies grow into the ecosystem that are focusing just on extraction, for example. And there's other ones that are focusing. GW Pharma is a great example, solely on the pharmaceutical side, the medical grade side of things. So there's all of these different components that, I don't even know. There is this, kind of, some of them will be an Amazon of the space, but it's becoming more faceted than that. We're seeing, as the industry develops, we're seeing individual companies that are becoming leaders in their specific vertical, if you will. And that's going to continue to play out for quite a while, which is, again, why we see so many people investing in a multi-strategy ETF, if you will. It gives exposure to that whole cannabis, because it's way too early innings to even try to guess who's going to be, the Google, Microsoft, the Amazon of the industry.
No, it definitely makes sense. And let's talk about the current environment, because, I mean, it's not right to say this, but it feels like it should be a secular industry, but it feels like it's kind of cyclical to the point where even, you look at 2016, the election, just before they run up and then it comes down. Then we had just, 2018 midterm elections. You had more states. I think it was 3 different states that approved some form of legalization. Now you have 5 states. Now just before the election started moving up again. Is it more about, more states getting approval? Is this just something, or is this, because for me, it seems like a secular trend, but also it seems like there's these companies all have to go through, just like what the technology companies went through during a tech boom, right? They just get crazy with their growth trends. They use their stock as currency to buy as many companies as they can. I get it, right? Rolling up and stuff. But now it's come to the point where I'm reading a lot of stories that the majors have a ton of inventory levels, which is going to mean lower prices, which is great for people who like this product, but not so great for margins. What are some of your concerns, or are you even concerned about that in the short term for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, short term, there's a lot of pressure on exactly what you said. If you look at Canada, Canada's an open market. It started as a limited license market on the health side, where the Health Canada was only issuing so many licenses. And that really allowed a lot of these early companies to come in and scale with, I'll call it, margin protection. But as we move to full national recreational use, it's really become an open market. And there's a number of cultivation licenses out there. It's a lot easier to open dispensaries now. And based on that, we're seeing more competition. And because we had such a rush of capital coming in the door several years ago, and so much growing capacity was built out, we do have this oversupply. So in the short term, am I worried about that? It's obviously it's hitting the balance sheets of these companies, clearly. But in the long term, that's going to sort itself out and everything will normalize. We'll end up getting to this point where the strongest companies survive, and we'll have this equilibrium in the open market. In the U.S., you've seen a very similar thing. We haven't seen federal legalization, as you know, in the U.S., but state by state, some states like California have a model similar to Canada, and it's hard to compete there. Again, open market, lots of competition, and high excise taxes as well. And in contrast to some of the limited license markets, we're like how we had in Canada initially, these kind of protected margins. We're seeing some of those multi-state operators actually do quite well. The problem is all of this is subject to change. I mean, I don't know and I don't think anyone does, what U.S. federal legalization is going to look like. So, today certain models work, but looking forward, depending on what the federal guidelines look like, whatever your model is could be completely turned upside down. And that's why we're seeing a lot of the ebb and flow in prices. We see companies, they come in, they're doing well, and then there's some changes, and the next thing you know, they fall out of favor. So some early stage companies that were managed well from the get-go and didn't overspend have continued to do well. Some of those companies, though, where they did overspend and don't have robust distribution networks, are falling by the wayside. We have new companies coming in that are learning off of that, and there's going to be a lot of M&A opportunity. And at the end of the day, it's a new and emerging industry. There's no institutional support with respect to stock prices yet, so we can see these somewhat emotional flows of cash come in and out, because in large part it's still largely retail buying and selling with respect to cannabis stocks. Less so on the global cannabis companies like Canopy, but definitely when we look at some of the U.S. names, I mean, it's primarily supported by retail trading.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with the institutions getting in, where it's not on legalized on the federal level, which is a little weird, right? I mean, because federal trumps states here, but it's not going to happen. Like, they could come in and seize a business in Colorado or anything, but the fact that that's open, I could see institutions being like a little law. And one of the other things that you mentioned, which is really interesting, I never thought about it, is how easy it is to start a business like this once it gets approved in the state, right? Because if you have a technology company, you really have to know a ton about technology. It's not the easiest barrier of entry, and even when you look at oil, the industry, there's some kind of technicals there where once this thing goes live, it's hard to have the established players where there's so many little players and local players out there. That makes a lot of sense, though, in this industry. But another thing you mentioned was some of the names that you said that had done a great job in terms of, they don't have high inventory. They've been smart with their costs and everything. Is there any names that you could share with us that you really like? And if you can't, that's perfectly fine. I understand. But names outside the mainstream that you're looking at that, wow, these guys are really getting it done. They got a good management team and looks promising.
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you look at the big global cannabis players, there's Canopy is kind of the bellwether. I mean, they have significant institutional ownership in them through Constellation. That's a big plus for them. That's going to be incredibly important, I think, as they turn themselves into a global CPG brand. If you think of it takes, as you mentioned, on its face, it's kind of easy to grow cannabis. It's a little bit less easy to grow and cultivate in a single state and sell it through state licensed dispensaries. But if you really want to scale this business, you have to do what Canopy's doing, and they're looking at the derivative products, so drinkables, edibles. On the medical side, at the end of the day, most physicians will not want to prescribe dry leaf. They're actually going to want to prescribe a specific, call it a gel cap or a pill that has a specific cannabinoid profile that's relevant to a particular ailment. So that takes a whole different skill set. And that's what we like about companies like Canopy Growth, is they have that strong management team, that institutional support to be able to take advantage of those opportunities on not just a continental basis, but on a global basis. Freya is another one that is an interesting company. They kind of, started in your more traditional format where it was a group of people that were very, adept in the agricultural space. But from there, management's fully changed over. They did some questionable acquisitions back in the heydays. But, with Irwin Simon at the helm, he's been there initially as chairman, and now he's the CEO. Bringing, again, that CPG experience. They have a very well-run company, strong balance sheet. And again, they are a CPG company first with a cannabis focus. And you can see that with their recent acquisition of Sweetwater. And you look at the valuation of a company like Aphria, they're only trading, their enterprise value to sales is just around 3 times. So, very reasonable multiple, trading just above book. It looks like a pretty interesting entry point for a company that has true global exposure to the cannabis industry. So there's a number of companies like that in MJ that have that. GW Pharma is another interesting one. I mean, the fact that they have the only plant-based cannabinoid drug that's approved by the FDA. So there's, again, early times, lot to come out, but there are some definite strong companies that have been doing this for a while with strong balance sheets and good management that look poised to take advantage of the next 10 to 20 years of global growth in the industry.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. Where do you see, because I talked about short term, and you're always going to have bumps, right, in the road in every single industry, no matter where you are. It's just, that's the way it is, especially if it's a high growth industry. You're going to make lots of mistakes. And these guys, I feel like, have learned a lot. Where do you see this industry in 5 to 10 years? Do you see it even in the U.S. approved on a federal level? I could see it exposure internationally, but yeah, I would think that you'd have to be pretty optimistic, right?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years. I mean, there's so much bipartisan support right now. And if you think of a post-COVID economy, where what we've really had is, a number of things: significant job losses, massive hits to state and local budgets, and you got the legal cannabis industry is one of the fastest growing, or if not the fastest growing industry for jobs in the U.S. There's this impetus to say let's legalize, because it's going to make it safer and more efficient to operate for these companies that are already, in legal states. 2, it's going to give the opportunity for more job growth. 3, a lot of tax revenues, right? All these things right now, they're incredibly important to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that's going to, whether you're red or blue, it doesn't matter, and you add to that the medical efficacy. I mean, we're seeing really deep red states that are approving programs now for that simple reason. They want access to medical cannabis. So I think there's a lot of reasons economically to do it. There's also a great opportunity for social justice reform to allow this new industry to grow and to actually bring in minority business enterprises as well. So I think that regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, it's going to happen in one way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. The only question is, I mean, if we end up with the Dems, controlling Congress as well, it'll be easier in shorter term. But even if it's not, even if we have a divided Congress, it's still going to happen. And then globally, same story. I mean, every country is fighting against massive budgets right now, figuring how to get people productive and employed again. And this is a great opportunity for everyone to get together and make that happen. So, that just legalization on its own won't be the end of it. Obviously, we'll have to see proper guidelines, regulatory reform. We saw hemp legalized in 2018, but with conflicting guidelines from the FDA, the DEA, and the USDA, it's still that industry still hasn't emerged. So, even once legalization occurs, it will take time to fully adopt and grow a full industry. But we're going to be tremendously further ahead 5 years from now than where we are today. Lots of upside, no doubt.
No, that's great. I was going to say, if you need an analyst to do boots on the ground, sample some of this stuff for you, let you know if it's any good, let me know. I'm sure you have analysts lined up out the door. Right? But I want to end on this, and this is really cool. So, and hopefully I'm not going to embarrass you, because this is kind of amazing. But I did read, because I always do a lot of research before I interview everyone, a lot of it, and it says that prior to completing your university studies, Jason was a member of the Canadian Forces and is a recipient of the Gulf of Kuwait Medal awarded for his engagement in direct combat during the Gulf War in 1991. That's really, really cool. So when I saw that, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Really cool. No, Thanks. That's awesome. I love getting to the personal side of people too, right? I mean, it's all business sometimes, but that's really cool to know that background. But listen, I want to thank you for coming on. We put this interview together pretty quickly. Thank you so much for being flexible. I know how busy you are.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And if you need anything on my end, please don't hesitate to ask. And good luck with your fund. And I'm sure it's going to draw a lot of attention even from this interview, because a lot of people are definitely interested in this trend.
Thanks very much. Well, hope to catch up soon.
All right. You got it. Take care.